So welcome everyone to this Arthritis Power hosted webinar on the Unique Device Identification System, or UDI. The title for today's webinar is Know Your Medical Device, Why the Unique Device Identification System Should Matter to You. I'd like to welcome our very distinguished guest speaker for tonight's webinar, Terry Reed. Very warm welcome to you, Terry. Terry has spent her career advocating for better use of data to inform healthcare system decision-making. And just to provide some context to tonight's webinar before I can hand over to Terry, and I won't take very long, I'll give you a little bit of background on what today's topic will cover. So currently in the US, we have over 1 million hip and knee replacements that are performed. Most of us, however, don't know the make, the model, or the serial number of the device that is implanted in us. The UDI system, UDI stands for Unique Device Identification System, that has been established and implemented by the FDA and is offering the opportunity to identify these devices using labels with unique numbers assigned to them by manufacturers and then linked to an FDA repository of regulated devices. So it's a very sophisticated surveillance and tracking system. Terry Reed, Senior Advisor to the FDA for the adoption of this system, today will talk to us about the latest information from the FDA on this unique identification system. And she will talk also a little bit about how, as a patient, you and I can support efforts to improve device tracking and safety. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Terry. Terry, I have control over your slides, so you can instruct me on when to move forward to the next slide. Thanks again for presenting tonight.
Well, thank you, Shilpa, and thanks to all the other members of the Arthritis Power team for allowing me share information about unique device identifiers with you today. So our title is Know Your Medical Device, Why the Unique Device Identification System Should Matter to You. What kind of comparison could I possibly make between medical device implants and car recalls? Well, as you look at this slide, which was taken from statistics referenced at the bottom of the slide, first of all, there's a similarity in volume. As you can see, the number of CAS procedures using devices is about the same as the number of Hondas sold, and likewise for knee replacements in Nissan and hip replacements in Volkswagen. The picture of the car on the right is a 2010 Honda Civic. It's a picture of my car. As a car owner, my purchase, maintenance, and use of that car is linked to a VIN number. The VIN number was recorded at the time of purchase, again when the car was registered, and each time the car is maintained. And even though I've moved 4 times since I purchased my car, I received that envelope that you see there in my current mailbox, notifying me of a recent recall, with instructions on what was wrong and what to do. I could even go to a public website sponsored by the government called safercar.gov and enter my VIN number to see all about the recall information. In contrast, if I had had one of the medical procedures on the left, I might actually have more than one device associated with that procedure. And if one of those devices was recalled, I might see it on a billboard. I might be notified by the doctor if they're still in practice. Or I might see it on late night TV and wonder whether I had that device or maybe not. It's not just cars that are tracked and monitored and linked to our user experience. In July of this year, Pepperidge Farms announced a voluntary recall of Goldfish crackers. This is a screenshot from the FDA website on that particular recall. Slide 4. The day after that recall was released, my neighbor received this recall on her mobile phone. Again, because of the link of her purchase as a consumer to the scanned UPC of the crackers, she was alerted in a very personal way to that recall. FDA has recalls listed for hip and knee replacements on our website, but not until recently was there a mandatory requirement for manufacturers to add this UDI to the label of implants, and requirements from other government agencies like the Office of National Coordinator for Health IT and the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services to record the UDI of implants in your health records. Until that time, we were lacking the structured data and link between patients and the implanted devices that would enable that patient to know their implant, report experiences about it, and be immediately notified of a recall, like with crackers and cars. Next slide. UDI is fundamental to making sure that the devices patients receive are clearly documented and identified in their health records. This is a picture of my mom, and it's clear that she owns a walker, visibly looking at her, but it wouldn't take much identification to identify that particular device. However, she has 5 other devices not visible to the naked eye, not visible to her care providers in her care center, but vital to her health. Next slide. If you were to ask my mom about her devices or whether she's concerned about them, she would more than likely say, "I don't worry about my implants. My doctors take care of me and would let me know if there was a problem." If you click through a couple of times, keep going. One more. Thank you. Nope. Go back. Sorry. What she does not realize, and most patients don't, is the unstructured and non-standard way her device information was captured. Even today, with UDIs appearing on the label of most devices, such things as a catalog number or serial number are typed or manually entered into a computer screen or a paper document. So no matter whether we are talking about health records, recalls, adverse events, or device registries, the truth is that the majority of health systems are not currently taking advantage of the UDI or the manufacturer-supplied data that's going into an FDA public database. Only a few hundred U.S. health organizations are using UDIs and linking it to patient records. Again, significant gaps, inabilities to compare data, to improve the detection of safety signals, the inability to really clearly evaluate patient outcomes linked to that device, and even improve device design. Next slide. Sometimes when I talk about these multiple identifiers, it doesn't make sense to people, because if they looked at a device label, they only see one number on the label, or they see the serial number. What they don't realize, and then up until UDI was introduced, at each point along the distribution of that device, some organization may have added or changed numbers used to identify the device. So this is a real example. There are dots at the bottom of the slide to indicate that there were over 50 different numbers that were associated with this 1/2 milliliter insulin syringe, 28 gauge needle. It was produced by Becton Dickinson, but it was distributed by a lot of different people. And even when it got to hospitals, it had a number. This is still happening today, but it is being reduced because there is this adoption of unique device identification. So I've highlighted in green what the device identifier portion of UDI looks like, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. That's the goal, to use that number to identify that particular needle and to get rid of those other numbers. Next slide. Go ahead. So the unique device identifier, UDI, is not just a US number, it's globally unique for a device. It's assigned by the manufacturer, and the manufacturer also submits data to a database at FDA that we call Access Good ID. That stands for Global Unique Device Identification Database. It's much easier to say Good ID than all of that. So we We refer to it as the Access Good ID. And the UDI is scanned and stored at the point of care, and it's a key to better safety and outcome information. Next slide. You know, it really seems like a no-brainer, moving from a world using multiple numbers for identifying a device to just one. A non-standard ID to a standard one, reducing reliance on implant cards to a system where the information is stored at the point of care and transmitted electronically, even possibly to your phone for lookup anytime you need it, where patients are empowered to ask for and receive implantable device lists identifying the company, model, and key characteristics of the device. In that world, we would be able to track problems with the device more effectively, compare products, be notified of recalls, report product issues, and ensure more transparency in the cost, quality, and outcomes associated with that device. Next slide. So I have talked a lot about UDI. This is actually what it looks like. This is one representation of UDI in the top left label there. I have put a box around a piece of the UDI. So the UDI is the whole string. It comes in a human readable format, so I can actually read the 01, 04, 022, etc. But the power of UDI is really in the fact that it must also appear in a scannable format. So you see that linear barcode there. The other power of the UDI is that device identifier, it's called, the box portion, is linked. That same number appears in that Access Good ID database that I was talking about. And that information is publicly available to you, to your clinician, or whoever else wants to use it. There is a record for every model of a regulated device. The idea is that the barcode from that label is to be scanned and the UDI to be used to retrieve and auto-populate your health record with the information from our database. Next slide. So this is the main screenshot of Access Good ID. I provide you with the URL to that website. It's not that we want each and every patient to go out there and search for a device, but we want you to know that this repository of information exists, and it's available to you, your provider, and especially to software vendors to make the identification of your device as accurate as possible. Next slide. This graph shows the growth of that Access Good ID database that I talked about from FDA over time. So you can see we started at 0 records back in September of 2013. It was actually September 24th of 2013. And as we approach as we passed September 24th of 2018, we just had our 5th birthday on the Good ID team. We are approaching 2 million records. We've rolled this out, and you can see little spikes around the September date. Those were compliance dates for manufacturers. Those were dates when they had to submit data because they fell into a particular category of device. So we started out with just high risk, very high risk devices back in September 2014. Then in September 2015, all the implantable devices needed to be in the database, as well as life-supporting and life-sustaining devices. In September 2016 was when our medium high-risk devices were to be in, and out into September 2020 are the class 1 or the very lowest of risk devices. Next slide. This shows a very high-level UDI timeline. And I purposely inserted this paragraph over in the bottom left. This was the paragraph that was part of legislation from Congress that FDA had to write our regulation. So Congress said FDA has to put in a regulation so that patients can adequately identify a device through distribution and use of that device. So I mentioned earlier that the other government agencies that that are really helping to drive UDI into patient records are the Office of National Coordinator for Health AT and the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They put into effect in 2015 a regulation that complemented our 2013 regulation. And in 2015, the Office of National Coordinator said that all EHR vendors, in order to be certified by that agency, had to meet certain requirements and be able to create implantable device lists for patients that could be transmitted to other systems. So I'll just take a minute to go through this slide just to kind of guide you with what those requirements were on electronic health record vendors. The way it works is you start with the patient who's having a procedure. The second picture is a barcode scanner. You scan the implant of the device that's being inserted into that patient. That scanner breaks up that full UDI into parts. It's a part that's associated with our database, that device identifier piece, and then things like the lot, serial number, expiration date, manufacturing date, and something called the distinct identification code for blood products. So all of that information in green there is what's represented in the UDI, and that scanner is what scans that product and splits all of that information to create the first part of an implantable device list for a patient. The next thing that happens is that device identifier piece, which I showed you was in our record and linked to the label of that device. That device identifier is used as a key to pull the data that's shown in the dark blue section of the implantable device list. So by scanning the device identifier, and all those production identifiers, the lot and serial number, the description, the company name, the brand name, the model of the device, whether it's MRI safe, whether it's labeled as containing latex, all of those things come from both scanning the device and pulling data from Access Good ID and auto-populating that record. If this works right, there is no manual entry. All of this comes from a single scan. Next slide. Oh, I also want to point out there are 133 EHR vendors that now are able to record and produce those implantable device lists. So the goal of the UDI program is the UDI adoption across the country, but also global adoption. The UDI is a unique device identifier across the world. This is true. The device industry is global, and safety information and outcomes in other countries can have an impact on patient care in the U.S. And as an illustration of the cooperation between countries, this is from MHRA. It doesn't matter what that stands for, but this is the UK's counterpart to our US FDA. And this spreadsheet shows a recall that they recently provided on their safety alert page. And what's significant about it is that it's a spreadsheet that can be downloaded by a health provider, and it's split up, and it has that same kind of information that I showed you before. It has a device identifier, it has lot, serial number, manufacturing date, and it has product descriptions. So the UDI becomes this standard identifier for improving the evidence that's used to improve device design. The idea is that you capture that same identifier, you don't create different numbers along the way, the same identifier from the time that that device is manufactured to the time it's used on the patient and beyond as you track reported outcomes from patients. You link that device identifier to the patient identity, especially for implants. Next slide. So this is more than just a pretty picture of a multicolored flower. It shows that better data for the petals of the flower depends on better data collected at the core of the flower. In the case of medical devices, if we scan the label, record the UDI, and pull data into fields like manufacturer, brand, does this product contain latex? This information can then be reused for comparative effectiveness research and other adverse events and other health information, because you will know you are accurately comparing the device with patient outcomes, improving patient safety, public health, and clinical decision support. And this is a slide provided by Dr. Don Mon, who is a well-known informatician. And what he says is, and it's very true, that you have to look ahead to what's being required for data for research and other issues like adverse events. Collect that data first so that you can integrate it later. Next slide. So what can you do? Well, I went out to the National Library of Medicine and I looked up questions to ask your doctor before a knee replacement. And I really didn't find much about asking about the identity of the device. So I made up my own questions. You may come up with better questions. But things to consider, like which device is better for patients like me? Or where would I go to find that kind of information, some kind of comparative effectiveness? Will you, as my physician, scan the UDI into my record? Does your hospital do that? Be empowered to ask these questions and ask your doctor when you receive an implant. Ask if their health records receive this information. Do they do it now? Are they planning to? Be aware that the more UDI starts to be included in health data, the better the information will be to improve research and even device design, matching which patients do better with which particular device characteristics. If you see patient information at FDA or other government resources, mention that you want to see UDI and question if it's not there. The same would be true. You may be teaching your clinician what UDI is all about. Next slide. The initial infrastructure has been defined by FDA and implemented by manufacturers. They supply all the data into our publicly available database. The manufacturers are the ones that put that UDI on the labels. But we don't have requirements on hospitals to use the UDI except for those software vendors who are putting that UDI into their software systems, creating those implantable device lists, and do have incentives for recording UDI. But it's going to take a village to ensure that we all can count on knowing as much, if not more, about our implantable devices as we know about cars and crackers. There are many organizations and individuals around the patient, the informed patient, who are committed to UDI, but you are really key to adoption. As a patient, you may need to be the one to educate your clinician. Other patient advocacy groups need to make the commitment, and they have, as they are today, to educate you. And they are also working with us in the FDA UDI program to support research that includes UDI. Next slide. Take advantage of what FDA and the manufacturers have provided that clinicians are learning about and starting to use. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Terry. That was really interesting and actually very powerful information for patients to know about. And we do have a few questions. I also want to encourage people to send questions through the chat window, and we can take them and post them to Terry. So let me start, Terry, actually by asking you if patients are actually told at the time when they're having the conversation with their doctors, with their surgeons about having an implant, a hip replacement or a knee replacement, are they told about any of this information? If they're not, how is it possible for us to create more awareness about this wealth of knowledge that exists out there for patients?
That's why I provided the screenshot from the National Library of Medicine. I think if there are checklists for what do you ask your doctor, and that checklist contains ask them about UDI, that doctors will start being aware. I know of many clinicians who know what UDI is, but I'm not sure if they believe that, patients care about it. I know I had a procedure. I had broken my clavicle. I had an implant put in myself. Now, this was about 4 years ago, but I asked them to record the device identifiers. I wanted it recorded in my information. Now I will go to a doctor myself with my iPhone, and there are actually apps that you can scan the UDI when a device is involved yourself, if you want to. If it's not available in your electronic health record, scan it yourself with an app that's available. There are about 10 apps that can actually scan the UDI barcodes and create a screenshot in your own phone. So the availability of tools will be increasing, but I think it really gets back to that village idea that as you are aware, make others aware too.
Great, thank you. We have a few more questions coming in, and we have two related questions. One is, where do you encounter the most resistance to UDI adoption? Is it from individuals, from doctors or surgeons, or device manufacturers? And related question is, how do manufacturers feel about adopting the UDI system? Do you see it becoming mandatory at some point for manufacturers to comply with the UDI system?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't make that more clear. It is absolutely a requirement on manufacturers. That was the graphic that I showed you, that the data in the database has increased over time. That's because of a regulatory requirement on manufacturers. So they are complying. And where's the resistance? I think even manufacturers in some ways, unlike other regulations, they have been extremely supportive of UDI, because if you can't clearly identify a device, it causes inefficiencies and ineffectiveness of the supply chain. So it costs them, it costs hospitals money when they order something with one number and they actually receive a different product, which has happened because of the multiple numbers. It's a very manual process right now. As I said, the UDI introduces this notion of scanning. So the resistance is more to the fact, I think, that all of these workarounds have been done over time, and there are workflows set up around it. And whenever you're trying to change workflows, it just, it's hard. And hospitals have a lot of priorities. And so this becomes a priority when there's a need for it, or if there's a champion in a hospital. And once it's done, because I've heard many stories about hospitals who have taken this on, who have committed to UDI, then there's no going back. Because a nurse who has had to manually write down the serial number in someone's health record or type it in never wants to go back to that process once they start scanning the product.
Right. Great, thank you. We have another question from Bonnie in the audience, who asks, so Bonnie had a pin implanted many, many years ago. And the question is, how would it be possible to find the record for implants that have been done in the past?
Yes, so we did not go backwards. The compliance dates were for those products that were produced at the time of compliance. So it's everything that the manufacturer puts into commercial distribution. Let's say the compliance date was September of 2014. Everything they manufactured after that time would have the UDI compliance. And so the reason I personally don't know my mom's hip replacement or other implants that I showed you, and why I'm so committed to this project, is because I can't find that information out either. And I don't want that to happen to other people.
Okay. We have a few more questions here. One is about the classes of devices. So does the UDI system apply for all classes of devices? So, or is it just for life-saving devices like pacemakers?
No, it is all classes of devices. So we have, I don't know if everyone's aware, but we have 3 classes. Class 3, which is the highest risk devices, like ventilators and those that really keep you alive. And implantables can actually cross classes, so I won't get into that. But we have class 3, then class 2 it's not medium risk, it's actually, we characterize it as medium high risk, and then class 1 are the lower risk products. We consider every device to have some level of risk. So those are our kind of broad categories, but all categories of devices apply to UDI.
Great. And we have a question here about research and the UDI system. So you talked about comparative effectiveness research and how the UDI system can assist with comparative effectiveness research. So it's not just a system that would help with surveillance and tracking and recall, but it could actually contribute and advance research on, say, possibly which devices work better, etc. Could you talk and expand a little bit more on that?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I work with multiple stakeholders, public-private partnerships, to show the value of UDI to those research projects. I can give you an example of one. We have been working for 2 years on a registry assessment of peripheral interventional devices. And one of the things that we've done is identify common data that would be collected across registries for those particular devices. Those are devices used in the legs, and UDI is part of those common data elements. And so one of the aspects of that research is to look at the different patient characteristics of patients who receive those implants and do a study to see which outcomes are more effective with each patient characteristics. So in that research, we're actually linking in a registry the device identifiers with UDI. That registry is having hospitals enter that device identification information from UDI. They're going out to Access Good ID, pulling that data into the registry, and then using that to come up with the analysis of those devices. And that's happening actually, it's starting in a variety of registries and fields. I also work in the area of women's health technologies. So we're looking at products associated with pelvic floor disorders, to have the registries associated with those, to include UDI. And also recently, I'm not involved with all the projects, but I know that the breast implant registry created their own UDI app to allow the hospitals to actually scan the product with that app and auto-populate the registry with that information. So there's a lot of exciting things going on that are taking advantage of that scanning capability, not just in health records, but in registries and in organizations creating apps to scan for whatever purpose they might have.
Great, this is really interesting. in terms of understanding that it can actually advance for the patient. It can advance research so that patients are able to make better informed decisions about which implant device, for example, might be best suited for them depending on their characteristics and preferences. Great.
And I should mention, I didn't even go into it. Maybe, could we go back to that? Well, I don't know if I had it on the timeline, but in 2012, when the UDI rolled out, at that same time, the FDA put out the startings of not this slide, that one. In 2012, 2013, the FDA put out their strategic plan, which had a circle with UDI kind of as the center to create clear identification of a device for national evaluation system that now is in place as well. In 2018, this national evaluation system for health technology is a public-private partnership. All of those demonstration projects that I'm working on fall under that national evaluation system, and more are being proposed, as time goes on. But with the notion that FDA has influence, because this UDI is an FDA regulation, we also want to encourage those who are evaluating devices to use it within their systems, like registries.
Great. Thanks, Terry. We have one more question, actually two more questions. One, I think you touched upon briefly earlier in the talk. This question is about orthopedic implants already in the field. Is there any way for it to be absorbed into the UDI system? So I guess what the question is really, if the UDI system is really just for new devices moving forward.
It's not new devices. If you're, like for example, my clavicle implant was put in 4 years ago. That product is still being produced. It's still in commercial distribution. I actually I went to the basement of the hospital where it was implanted, asked for my health records, my operative notes. I found an invoice that had a catalog number. I contacted the company. So it can be done because I was able to find the company, and I now have the device identifier information for my clavicle plate, my screws, and I also have the material it was made of. So it was really helpful just to even have that conversation. But it took a lot of work, obviously, to go and get those health records, and then finding the manufacturer to ask them, what was the device identifier and what was linked to it. It can be done. But that said, if your product or your orthopedic implant is no longer in commercial distribution, and it wasn't in commercial distribution at the time that UDI rolled out for that product, then you wouldn't be able to find that UDI. So it's really a matter of your circumstance that I can't judge. So it's not. So I guess the point is, it's not just new products. The product could have been on the market for quite a while. It's just, is it on the market at the time the manufacturer needs to meet their compliance date for UDI? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that clarified another question that came in around the same topic. So thank you for that. And then our last question, actually, and I'm going to try and bring up that slide. We have a question about the barcode that you were talking about. And the question is, where exactly does that barcode appear that needs to be scanned? Is that on the device? Is that in a manual? The patient is asking, where exactly does that barcode appear?
It depends. If it depends. It depends on the device, and devices are packaged differently. So it should be on the label of the device. And again, with that paragraph from Congress, the original requirement on FDA, it has to be on the label, and that label has to be in a place where the healthcare provider can record that information at the point of use.
Great, thank you. So I think we've exhausted all the questions. We had quite a few. Thank you for answering them very patiently.
Yes.
And really providing some very powerful information to our patient community. And I wanted to also thank everyone for taking the time to attend this webinar. This webinar is recorded and will be posted online, so people can go back and listen to it and share it with others in the patient community as well. So thank you very much, Terry, for taking this time, and we hope to have you back on a webinar again very soon.
Thank you so much.